Hello, I'm Craig DeRoche, the CEO of Family Policy Alliance. Today, we're unpacking a case before the U.S. Supreme Court that could redefine how states treat free speech, religious liberty, and counseling for children struggling with gender ideology. How can you get one Supreme Court decision that does all of them? But on October 7th, the court heard oral arguments against Chiles versus Salazar, a challenge to Colorado's law that bans mental health professionals. These are certified professionals, medical professionals, from counseling minors to accept their biological sex, even though that's probably what a lot of these people have been trained to do. Joining us is Joseph Kohm, Vice President here at Family Policy Alliance for Public Policy. He's the one that works on our policies. He's the co-host of House to Home, and he was in Washington during these arguments. He's our subject matter experts on this. He's going to discuss this. Joseph, it's such a privilege to have you on here. I'm sorry that we always, half the time we're winning on good stuff, but other times it's this crazy stuff that we got to fight against. Tell us, first of all, thanks for being on the show. Everybody's glad to see you again.
As always, it's an honor to join you, Craig. So thanks for having me back on.
You're great, Joseph. So Chiles versus Salazar, did I get the name right?
That is correct. It is indeed Chiles versus Salazar.
And how on earth is a transgender case a free speech case? That's, like inquiring minds want to know. Let's start there.
Yeah, it's a great question. The easiest way to think about it is free speech for the mental health care professionals you mentioned. These are mental health care professionals, counselors, psychiatrists who counsel patients that come to them with problems that they want to help resolve. And in this case, Kaylee Chiles is a mental health counselor in the state of Colorado, where FPA is headquartered. And Colorado has a law that says that mental health counselors cannot counsel child patients struggling with their sex and who they are and their sexual identity to become comfortable with their biological sex. They can only counsel them to do one thing, and that is to transition to whatever the new identity is. Kaylee Chiles is a Christian counselor. She can't do that because of her faith and because of her professional convictions. So she challenges the law through this case.
This is worth going through one more time, folks, because when we think free speech, whenever you read, maybe it's just me, Joseph. When I think free speech, you're talking about me. I'm an American citizen, and I'm Joe Six. I used to be Joe Sixpack. I used to be Joe Case of Beer, right? But it's about my free speech. This is about the counselor can't counsel, or the counselor has to be a mouth of the government. That's what you just said. And
That's
so
exactly
that's what
right.
the counselor, Chiles in this case, is saying is, wait a second, I'm the counselor, not the Colorado legislature. Is that what is in the Supreme Court?
That's essentially right. The state of Colorado is basically telling mental health counselors how to do their job. And really, it's even narrower than that. They can only do their job in one specific way. The state is picking what they think in their hubris is the only appropriate outcome for this counseling, rather than giving patients and their counselors the freedom to choose what the outcome that they want from the counseling.
You said that, and I'm so fascinated by this, Joseph, because didn't Elena Kagan in this case, the liberal Elena Kagan, asked the exact same question in the same type of format as Justice Alito and got the same answer, and she wasn't impressed with it either.
She admitted on the record, Craig, and I'm basically quoting here, she said, "This seems like blatant viewpoint discrimination to me," which has always been protected against by the First Amendment.
So let's unpack that because I want everybody to understand this. What's going on? Because folks, this is end game stuff for the last 50, 70 years of progressive politics. Their lies had to be truth for everything else they built on. And the Supreme Court in these cases are systematically returning America to the truth, right? That's what each of these rulings is about. And we're grabbing even progressives now that are seeing this. So it would be the equivalent for an Elena Kagan, probably more liberal than progressive, maybe is what she was talking from at least that day, to say like, wait a minute, if you put me into another program and you say I got to drink Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, you're selling Coca-Cola, say the high school. You know what I mean? The counselors can't tell people if they want a refreshing caffeinated drink with fizz. You can't tell them Pepsi. And that really is just marketing and it's viewpoint. I think is that literally what the Supreme Court was able to whittle this down to? Because they've spent 70 years trying to make this complicated, Joseph, make this about some civil right or some biological need. And at the end of the day, it's becoming something different than that, isn't it, in the court?
That is effectively what I assessed that the justices drew out of the Solicitor General of Colorado during the oral arguments, which is essentially that the state has a preferred outcome from these counseling sessions because the state has a preferred pro LGBT ideology and therefore, by necessity, an anti Christian, anti family ideology. And they are requiring mental health care professionals to be complicit in forwarding that preferred ideology and preferred outcome.
Now let's go back to that because I know our audience is like, now wait a second. I know what Joseph Kohm just said is happening. That's probably happening where I live in Commerce Township, Michigan, Joe. And it's happening where you live in Richmond, Virginia, everywhere else, right? Everybody knows that's happening. So how did Colorado Solicitor General say when she's called to the carpet and the bright lights of the Supreme Court justices, none of them waste time on suffer fools anywhere. And they say, you have some fancy ideas. We've made time for you. What are they? What did the Colorado Solicitor General try to serve up to them?
I think her basic argument rested on two fundamental premises that, to the left, the anti family forces in our government are held as absolute dogma. One is that there is a mental sense or a mental health, medical, scientific consensus that affirmation only counseling and treatment is the standard of care. That's not true.
So the first one is they're saying enabling an addict will solve their addiction. I'm not sure if anybody else listening has heard there's a different psychological viewpoint to that or not, but this is what the Solicitor General tried to tell 9 Supreme Court justices.
Or
You need to
starving and
enable
anorexic.
this fault. You need to enable this lie, or how would anybody consider the lie to be true? So on the first, I just want to know, did the first one get any traction with anybody?
Fortunately, no, because the Supreme Court has been through much of this same evidence before in last year's United States versus Skermeti case, which our listeners will probably be familiar with, in that it constitutionalized our entire Help Not Harm campaign at FPA. That case revolved around the actual child sex change, drugs, and surgeries. But the Supreme Court examined a lot of this evidence then and determined very openly that there is no medical consensus that affirmation only is the standard of care. The medical community is very much figuring this out. And we as Christians, Craig, we have a bit of a cheat code. We know ahead of time that this affirmation only is not only not the standard of care, but is actually harmful. Science is always catching up to the Bible.
Amen. And folks, in the Bible, it says something, Joseph. It says you can't serve God and this one thing at the same time, I think. This one thing is money, but it isn't just money. It's security. It's the revenue for your government. It's the support for your campaign to get reelected, right? And what we're finding is people aren't serving people in crisis. They're not helping people that are looking for an answer to their problem, that have gender dysphoria. They're looking to enslave them, and they're using permanent, irreversible drugs and surgeries to do this. Our civil courts are behind in this, folks, but the civil suits are hours away. And I expect the people that have been involved in this to lose their livelihood, their businesses, the leadership of the hospitals, all these clinics. Personally, I don't respect this enough to say that I hope that their retirement funds are protected or their homes. I think people that do this to their kids should be held accountable to the same as if they pimp their kids out for sex trafficking or something else. And that's our position here. We're really animated about this because the science, Joseph, is opposite of what they're saying. Tell our listeners what they're saying, that this is hurting kids. What is actually the truth? Does these clinical treatments for transgender that involve the drugs and the surgeries we're talking about, does it make it less likely or more likely that a person in those drug things will commit suicide?
There's a little bit of evidence beginning to show that it will actually make them more likely, sadly, to consider suicide and maybe even attempt it. There is certainly no evidence that doing these sort of procedures to children to try in vain to change their sex alleviates their discomfort. It certainly doesn't. It certainly does not make them less suicidal by any stretch.
Did the Solicitor General in Colorado or any of these other liberal groups attempt? They've been doing these transgender surgeries and drugs since the 70s, actually the 60s, I think, but 70s more at a scale that you would hold a licensed professional accountable for. I think it was more garage experimentation before that. But has anybody actually tried to validate any of these experiments and present them to a governing body?
Yes, definitely. And you could see this play out in the oral arguments actually 2 days ago. You could see the justices questioning Miss Stevenson, asking, which studies are you referring to? Like, give us an example of this medical consensus. And after some back and forth, I suspect it was some attempted delay from Miss Stevenson. She did finally reference a few studies, but most notably from an activist researcher named Jack Turbin, who's been debunked many times in his research. But she cited this activist, both his studies and
Blogger.
his amicus
This
brief,
blogger
to
has an
support her
opinion.
consensus. And to his great credit, Kaylee Chiles' attorney, Jim Campbell for Alliance Defending Freedom, in his rebuttal argument after Miss Stevenson, totally eviscerated Jack Turbin's research and all the research that Miss Stevenson cited for all the same arguments that we have been arguing against them for years in the legislative venue, Craig. It was actually a little validating, if I have to admit it.
This is so delightful, folks, and it is one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you about this. We talk to you about these abstract things sometimes. We think they're abstract. You guys support us through all of them, but most people would say we just need to pass a bill, right? We just need to pass something in Congress, or the president needs to write something. Our country's more complicated than that, folks. We're a federal. We have a constitution. We have 50 sovereign states. We have to fight this everywhere, and most groups don't do that. They try to tell you at home, like, "Oh, the president said we're not going to do this anymore, and so we're done." We know that we have to eradicate this at every school board. We have to do it in every city council, every county commission. We have to do this everywhere in all the hospitals. And when you support Family Policy Alliance and our family policy councils, that's what you're doing. You're making a 360-degree investment in this for the kids to make sure that we'll have the policy in place, but we're also working with the administrators of these facilities to root out this evil. Because if you guys aren't getting anything else from what we're talking about here, Joseph and I, ask yourself this. Why are they were telling people they had the answer for their life, and it required chronic, you're a healthy person, and I'm going to give you a chronic disease that requires your entire dependency of your life on me, the government. And there's no evidence that that's helping anybody else out. And we're going to force you to stay in this lifestyle. And that made it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. I just want everybody to understand that this is a really dark time, Joseph, that we're in American history. What I just described is going to be obvious to every American and everybody in the world that studies America for the next 500 years of how stupid we got, like in our treatment of human beings and our worth and our dignity of people. Justice Alito, as he often does, brought this to a point. Tell the audience what Justice Alito did, where they're trying to say all these fancy legal arguments. What did Justice Alito do?
Yeah, this is the right time to bring up this part of the oral arguments, Craig. So, as I was saying, Miss Stevenson made two arguments. The second argument she made was that these feelings in these patients, or these inclinations to alternative sexual identities, are innate, they're unchangeable, that these people are born this way, right? So that's why they have this standard of care. So Justice Alito very incisively questioned her about whether in the past scientific and medical consensus has been caught up in political ideology or whatever is trendy of the day. And to his great credit, he pointed very specifically to the Supreme Court's, one of the black marks on the court's history of jurisprudence, which is their authorization of forced sterilization laws at the behest of the eugenics movement. And he quoted very powerfully from the infamous Buck v. Bell decision, authored by Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, that 3 generations of imbeciles is enough, which we now can look back on and view rightly as horrifying, nauseating, even tragic comedic, Craig, as you show. But we know better now is the point. Justice Alito's point is this is the danger of resting a policy prescription on a medical consensus that could rightly change in the future and has dire human consequences.
Amen, Joseph. Thank you for making that so clear. And folks, from what Joseph just said, this is where I want to get a little deeper, from like the so what for Family Policy Alliance. And, really, we're a Christian organization, and you say, you're born this way, Joseph. That's what I want to talk to you about. That to me is an affront to not only my faith, but to my hope that I have for humanity, to every secular thing I've ever written about what America is as an idea and as an organization. And you're born this way. I was born an alcoholic, Joseph. My mom was at her 10-year anniversary drinking. Like I was born with alcohol in my body. And when I started drinking again when I was 10, I knew I was born that way. It made sense to me. I felt normal for the first time, probably since I was born when I was 10. Is there anybody on the planet, if they look back and my record would say, we should be empowering him to have alcohol every day for the rest of his life. And if he can't afford it, the government should give it to him. Right? The same with our friends that get enslaved by gambling, the same as people that chase their tail on debt or a codependency in relationships. It's not always money and it doesn't have to be an addictive substance, Joseph. What I'm saying is that I was born this way, that logic uh, that the secular left uses, and they say it's consistent with American Constitution. It isn't, is it?
Is I think it's an affront to traditional American attitudes and rights when it comes to government. And that's what I think should be most infuriating to your average American is the paternalism in that argument coming from the apparatus of a government. It's one thing for WPATH or someone like that to make this argument. It's another for the Solicitor General of a state government to stand up in the Supreme Court and to tell the world, we know your kids struggling with gender dysphoria better than you do. We know what the outcome should be for them better than they do or you do. So we're going to force them to transition into that opposite lifestyle, and we're going to force their counselors to be complicit in it. That should be appalling to the core of every single American who loves freedom.
So, Joseph, I alluded to it earlier, but we have a little bit of time on this show, and I think some people in the media might actually tune in on this one and check out what's going on. So, I want to go ahead and say it. I said it earlier. Um, this was about free speech for the counselors, right? The
Mhm.
counselors are what it's heating up around. We've gone through about 50 years of medical professionals thinking they could talk about abortion, a medical the killing of the child is actually done in a medical environment that's regulated and everywhere. And the same with these other drugs and everything else. How far off do you think we are from when the floodgates open up and we start seeing it's common? It's not actually like any group doing it. I'm not even saying we're going to do it. I'm just saying it'll be common that a Richmond or a Boise jury returns a multi-million-dollar verdict because a school teacher and the mental health counselors all led them on this wild path. And the kids, an adult now, and they're saying, just like the kids that were abused by the Catholic Church and stuff, hey, you know what? That was wrong and I'm going to hold you accountable. When do you estimate that's going to start?
I think we're very close, Craig, and really our supporters deserve a lot of credit for this because they enabled us and our state networks to pass a wave of help not harm legislation that opens up the door for these patient victims, these children, to sue the medical professionals who did this to them and gain these judgments. 25 states have a law that enables that. That doesn't happen without FPA and without the people that support FPA. So we are close. There are several detransitioner lawsuits ongoing that are receiving serious consideration, including the great heroic Chloe Cole. She is suing the people who did that to her. But I think this case as well, Chiles v. Salazar, is a reminder that we are still, while we are winning the battle against gender ideology and protecting our kids from it, there's still quite a long way to go because this ideology has spent many years infiltrating every institution of our governments and our civic life. And so that's why it's so important that we ensure mental health care counselors are free from the strictures of governments and their institutions to be able to counsel in an honest way based on their convictions so that those children are able to get the actual help they need and not be harmed by this ideology. So, like I said, Craig, your answer is we're very close. I think we're going to see that soon, and that will be the first real floodgate that opens. But we've still got to really press our advantage to root this ideology out of our society.
So people are at home right now and they want to know what can I do about this, Joseph? Like, what am I supposed to do? I think the call to action here is you need to start telling your friends. You need to start sharing these podcasts with other people because we're moving now. Understand we had to have a basis to move. And it took us like a decade to establish that. But you just heard from our policy director, we're moving forward. We have the support, Joseph. We can't predict a poll, but there's been enough of them now. We know we're not over 80%. Well, maybe we are, but we know we're way over 70, probably easily over 75% of support of Americans for these issues now, right?
Yes, absolutely. This is at minimum an 80-20 issue and probably a 90-10 issue as soon as Americans really understand the gravity of it. There's not many issues like that in today's world, as you know, Craig, but this is an overwhelming issue. We're bipartisan issue. Everybody agrees we should not be doing this to our kids.
And folks, it's directly related to the sexualization of our children, which is not necessary. And to the extent that your kid needs explanations, I can't imagine a circumstance in any public school that I've ever been to in my entire life. And I was a speaker of the house. I met so many of these people and everything else where that would be the right place to teach them about sexual performance. Folks, the lies of the left are all coming apart right now. You have helped us make that happen because you've empowered Family Policy Alliance to be the voice of not just this mental health counselor Chiles to get all the way to the Supreme Court, but for tens of thousands of mental health counselors, for the pharmacists that are listening to this, that work for CVS and Rite Aid and Walgreens, we need you to join us. We need you to add your email in here so Joseph and I can text you. If you know doctors and nurses and psychologists and others that are Christians, folks, we need to build an army to push back. They're trying to say with these secular leftist people they put on the payroll that are professionals that they're the only opinion that matters. They're the only opinion that our federal government should listen to. But the counter to that, Joseph, would be as if we had thousands of medical professionals at Family Policy Alliance and our family policy councils that would raise their hand and say, I will use my experience to undo these lies. So if you're hearing this within the sound of Joseph and I's voice, and you're a medical professional and you're not in our list, you're going to sign up. If you know somebody who's a Christian that is worried about their conscience, the stuff they're being forced to do is uncomfortable to them, and they say, I wish somebody would stick up for me. He's on the show right now. His name's Joseph Kohm. He's a hockey player. He's a thug. He will stick up for you. Put your email in. Join us now. But being serious, Joseph, take us out from here. This is a hopeful podcast, right? This is traction
Yes.
for our movement, right?
I want people to know that you and your children are on the verge of being able to get the health care you really need, and the fact that you couldn't get it before was an injustice. And FPA and groups like us are standing against that to undo that injustice. So if you want to see that, you want to make your voice heard, like Craig said, join us, support us, share our content. I would encourage you, if you're a Christian, share it with the spiritual leaders in your life, like your Bible study leader or your pastor, so that they can in turn inform your congregation about it, and everybody can go out and make a difference in their world. And just for this case, I would just ask, Craig, that people would pray for the justices and their clerks as they are conferencing and deciding how they're going to rule in this case. Like I said, I'm usually a pessimist about the court, Craig. I am very, very hopeful for the outcome of this case. I think we are
Going
going
to
to
make you
win.
do that. I'm like, now we got to be like ESPN when we have you on and it's a court case. It's like ESPN. So who's going to win the game at the end of it? And you just said
Okay.
we're going to win the
Yeah.
game, right?
I think we're going to win definitively. I can't quite be as boisterous as Pat McAfee about it, but I can definitively say I think Kaylee Chiles and mental health counselors around this country are poised to finally get justice in this case.
Well, from your lips to God's ears, thank you all. You people that are listening to this, you're the ones that made that possible for this professional Childs. Please, thank you for your support. It's not about us, it's about her and it's about everybody else. So help us help all these people that are under pressure right now. Thank you for all your support. Until next week, God bless you all.